Hello, my YouTube audience. This is Kian Sobani, and what you're about to listen to is a compilation of my thoughts on the Super League over the past 24 hours or so. And I don't normally do this. I don't normally post full segments of our podcast on YouTube because that defeats the purpose. I want you guys to go and subscribe to the RSS feed, but I'm still not posting the full podcast because there's still a lot of content that happened outside of this discussion, but I'm posting the full segment of the Super League discussion just as a one-time thing, and I hope you can appreciate it and find some value in it. So part one of what you're about to listen to is my discussion with Arvin late last night when the Super League was initially announced. That was a raw, off-the-cuff reaction to the Super League. And my opinions on the Super League haven't changed since then. I just had some added takes. So part two of this conversation happened today, which is also in this little compilation. It was with Matt Wiltsey. I added some fresh new takes on the Super League with some new information and new news that we got in. And I'm sure this opinion or at least our view on it and perception on it will change as we get more news and we have more reactions to it. But again, I don't normally do this, so I hope you enjoy it. And so again, part one is Marvin and I reacting to it late last night. And part two is Matt Wiltsey and I having a kind of more collective, calm, and cool, composed take, if you will, a day after. And for everything else, just go follow me on Twitter at KeonSo, and you'll kind of see my reactions on the fly to everything over there on live time. And yeah, enjoy it. Before we get into tonight's post-game podcast, we are going to spend a chunk of time here to talk about the European Super League because it's impossible to ignore. And to be quite honest, the game feels very secondary right now. And the entire dialogue right now is about the European Super League and all the information that's changing from second to second. And it's too difficult, too impossible, too big of a thing to ignore, especially when your own freaking president is the one spearheading it and is the president of the Europa Super League. So joining me right now is Arvind, who is not going to be part of the post-game show, but he's here to just talk about Europa Super League things. Initial thoughts to Europa Super League. Do you like the idea or do you hate the idea?
I really don't, and I think my sentiments will reflect a lot of what current fans are feeling at the moment, but I think going a little further, because there is this general idea, right, that football is now broken and it wasn't before, and I think we need to be clear about the fact that if you don't like this, football was on this path for a very long time. And if we are to somehow, I think it's impossible at this point, but if we are to go to a place where we can fix this, we're going to need to reform football and probably do more than reform in a way that is going to make it look totally different than what it is now. So I'm sure we'll get into it. That's just my immediate kind of thought and lines I'll give off about how I feel about the Super League. How do you feel about it? Do you have mixed feelings? Are you positive about it? Because if you're just purely a Real Madrid fan, right, the only thing you care about is like Real Madrid finances and stuff, this is a good thing, right? But I think all of us like to think about ourselves as more than just Madrid fans and football fans as a whole. But I know there are people who are like, you know what? I don't want to see Real Madrid versus Eibar, right? And I want Mbappe next year. So there are some people that think this is a positive thing.
Well, the amount of twists and turns and rebuttals from UEFA and FIFA and the leagues and this person and that person and Boris Johnson coming out and tweeting stuff and it's
he said something about it?
Yeah, he came out against it too. I forget what he said, but
this is so surreal.
So and also, by the way, the Mbappe thing. Then there's the twist of again, I don't want to get into this stuff too deep because we don't have factual information for all that stuff, but the PSG have reportedly so far declined to be in it. Who knows if that will actually remain to be true, if they'll eventually cave. Like the latest report is that Bayern has actually joined rather than not joined, because everyone was like, oh, Dortmund and Bayern mad respect for not joining this team. But I think it's a matter of time that they just they get sucked into this. But then the reports of PSG not joining mean that they would never sell Mbappe or Neymar to a team in the European Super League, as they call it. I think even that, eventually everything will cave. We can talk about all the little kind of methods and tactics all of these opposing forces can have on the Europa Super League and the leverage they'll have, I think my personal prediction is everything will cave into the European Super League. That's my personal hunch. So what, do I like it or do I not like it? Look, I've actually, not to take the hipster view on it, that's not my goal here, but I will provide devil's advocate. I have always been vocal about the idea of a European Super League. Sounds cool to me. And by the way, I agree with you that I think it was inevitable something like this would happen. Whether it was this year or 10 years, it doesn't matter. It's inevitable that football would change in some way to capitalize on the maximum amount of money as possible. And by the way, like, as much as, even if for anyone who loves it, and which, by the way, I'm not the person who loves it, and I'll explain what my stance is in a second. Even the person who loves it absolutely loves the idea, which is not going to be that common of a person to find, but you'll find them. Even they will have to succumb and submit to the idea that none of this is about sport or football. It's about money. That's it. Full stop. That's it. It's all about money. It has nothing to do with football. This is not about merit. Tottenham and Arsenal do not merit to be in something like this. But this is going to be a New York Knicks situation where James Dolan can be happy sucking every single year because the fans will just show up and he gets a revenue, he gets a cut of the league money, and he sits pretty. And just like Levy will be happy with that and Arsenal will be happy with that. The fans might not be, but the owners will be. And that's kind of the unfortunate situation we're in. So I've liked the idea of European Super League, but not as is currently proposed. I like the idea of the European Super League that involves every single person and is not exclusive. Once you start to get into the exclusivity of it, you start to get into this kind of NBA or American sports model where everyone is in one league, which, by the way, like, let's not be hypocritical. We all enjoy that. You and I are huge NBA fans. And by the way, what's going to happen is that I think even the ones who are saying right now they're going to boycott this, and I think eventually, whether you like it or not, it's going to succeed. I don't know what else to tell you. It's going to succeed. I can't see it not succeeding. You think people are just going to stop watching football that it includes all the best players in the world on a scale like this? It's not. It's going to succeed whether we want to or not. I'll put those points out there first.
So the NBA thing is an interesting comparison I've seen thrown around a bit, a lot of because of the pro-rel side of it, and that definitely is a similarity between the NBA and kind of what's happening now with the European Super League. I do think an important distinction to draw is that, like, the financial regulations for the NBA is totally different, right? There are things done, and whether you think they're perfect or not, there are things absolutely being done to try to create some level of parity. And so even though the only way, like, you can have a new team in the NBA is to have, like, an expansion team or something like that, there technically is a chance, right, for the worst team, like for the New York Knicks right now, if they ran themselves decently, I mean, they could go back and win a championship, right? And Knicks is a big brand, right? But even if we talk about, like, worst teams, right, they have a shot if they run themselves properly, right? And they will get, like, draft picks and things like that. And, you know, the structure of football is different in such that you can't channel youth that way. But I think it is important to draw that distinction because I think that gets to the point of where I'm going about the changes that would need to be made if we were ever to kind of roll this stuff back. Because you said it correctly that it's all about money, and it's always been about money, and this is just a crystallization of that desire, right? And to be quite honest, UEFA, FIFA, all the leagues are directly responsible for this, right? Just taking the Premier League, for instance, with that TV deal they made with the actual creation of the Premier League, they were clear that it was all about money. It was just all about money for themselves and for the league. And as long as it was like that, they were happy about it. And the only reason they're resisting it now is because they're about to lose all that money, right? There's absolutely nothing altruistic about it. And just as an aside, the PSG thing might have to do with the fact that, you know, they own massive TV networks, right, that have bought the rights to the Champions League and stuff. So they have a vested interest. Their owners have a vested interest possibly in maintaining things as they are. And so that's what I'm talking about, right? You'd need to do something drastic to basically rein in the motivations and desire for teams to continue making money, right? Because again, this is where the side of, like, this is kind of what Matt was saying earlier, right? And I don't think he was taking a position. He was just explaining Florentino Perez's logic that, what Perez is doing is rational purely from a Real Madrid perspective, right? And you need something to rein that in if you care about football as a whole. And that will look like some types of revenue caps, revenue sharing, which Madrid fans might not like to hear, but that's the reality of what you want if we are to get back to a place where a European Super League is not possible, because we need to acknowledge that football was probably broken before. So revenue sharing, maybe the way ownership works needs to be changed. Like, I don't know if state-owned companies and financial groups that are essentially just like venture capital firms owning stuff like that all just kind of feeds into these, alternative motivations that are things beyond football, right? Like, that's what would need to happen, right? Essentially, and I'm just trying to make the point that, I'm not just trying to be cynical and score like points here, like, oh, if you're complaining about it now, why weren't you complaining about it before, right? I think this is the reason this is such a huge thing is because it's become so egregious and the greed has come out so into the open that people who were okay with things before cannot ignore it. I'm just trying to make the point, right, that just saying, let's go back to the Champions League as it was, La Liga as it was, that's not good enough, right? Because the sport was kind of dying already then, and that's why we're here at the point. I just want to link the cause and effect and sort of start to introduce the idea of what we need to do to start to have any kind of chance of like reforming the game in the way we want to see it. Now, obviously, I'm not an expert on the regulation stuff, so I'm just giving very broad kind of ideas that would need to happen. But actually, it might look something similar to what the NBA does or American sports does, which I guess is a little contradictory or ironic because a lot of people are saying, right, the European Super League is what the NBA or the NFL or NHL is right now.
I guess the difference is, and I mean, maybe this will change in the future. And by the way, there's always resistance to change. I mean, the Champions League format itself has changed multiple times. It's expanded, it's decreased teams, it's increased teams, it's changed group stage. It's been 2 group stages, it's been 1 group stages. It's, it's changed a lot, and everyone's always been resistant to the initial change. And that's just kind of how the human mind works. Maybe like 20 years from now, this will be forgotten and people will be in love with this format. I don't know. But the way it's currently presented, I mean, the big difference is that it's still not as big as an NBA league. There's only 20 clubs who will participate in this. So maybe that expands to like 30 teams, which I think would be more inclusive. What is it? The Champions League is 32 teams right now, right? So really, like, we're 12 teams short from it being a Champions League in a way. But obviously, there's a lot of implications and a lot of animosity that arises from it because it's meant to branch out of UEFA. And by the way, you mentioned the reason for PSG being excluded for this time being, which is funny to me because, I mean, like, I don't know, the saying, the enemy of my enemy is my enemy. A lot of fans supporting UEFA now, like, look at all the people who are opposing this idea. The irony of it. None of those people who are opposing it, apart from the fans, are pure intention. UEFA, they don't want to lose their money. Premier League, they don't want to lose their money. Sky Sports, it's because they're locked into a mega TV deal. That's all they care about.
And they're probably going to like file lawsuits and stuff now to try to get out of it and purchase ESO rights as soon as possible.
Yes, 100% they will. 100%. So, just keep remember who you're supporting. But just remember, like, there's always an agenda somewhere. So as currently proposed, 20 clubs will participate, the 15 founding clubs and another 5 additional teams that will be classified annually based on the performance of the previous season. So in short, there is a relegation system and a promotion system annually. However, the originally founding clubs are grandfathered in, led by Papa Flo, who, I mean, this is literally extremely relevant to our podcast because the founder of the European Super League is literally Florentino freaking Perez. I don't know whether to be proud or I don't know. Obviously, there are a lot of people who are disgusted by it, and I'm just using their words on Twitter. Just the fact that he spearheaded this and is the freaking president of it. How much influence does this dude have to go around to Real Madrid, Barcelona, Atletico, AC Milan, Arsenal, Chelsea, Inter, Juventus, Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, and Tottenham and tell them this is what we're doing and I'm the president, and they're all signing up. Does that seem like a little bit like that's like a Godfather-ish to you kind of move?
I mean, he is who he is. When it comes down to achieving what he wants to achieve, there are few people better. So, like, which is one of the reasons why I don't doubt when Real Madrid kind of say they can't afford something, or they indicate that they can't. They probably can't, because Florentino is going to get what he wants done. I mean, it's not something to be proud of, obviously, in my opinion. I think I've made that clear. I don't know if I'd respect it more, but I appreciate it more if the statements were just clearly about what it was, right? Which is, it's about money. But instead, and this was released by every club basically saying the same thing, it's about, handling COVID better so we don't have to sack our employees. And, like, I don't know how rich you have to be. If there's, like, entities that can be rich enough not to do that, it would be these 12 super clubs. They also, and this is, I think, an important point, which is going to be overshadowed as it too often is they also said that, like, this is going to be good for the women's game, right? Which I just want to say is absolute nonsense, right? I really take offense to using that as a shield for the justification for the decision. Just say it's about money. We all know it is. Don't try to come in and say this is about the women's game, right? Because maybe for these particular teams, right, who will get the money, it might end up being good, right? And the way we handle Real Madrid Femenino will be better than how Primera Iberdrola handles it, which is garbage because the way they run it is trash. So in that respect, I kind of get it. But what happens to literally every other women's team around the world, right, who are in really precarious situations in poorly run leagues, and who honestly, kind of maybe rely on, like, Barcelona and Real Madrid drawing some eyes to their matches and drawing attention, right? Like, we're talking about a situation, particularly in Spain, where players can't even get their contracts honored properly in regard to social security, which apparently is tied to their contracts, and they have to launch social media campaigns every single month just to get people to pay attention and to put pressure on their clubs to honor them, to honor their contracts, right? There is this whole fight for professionalism with the league itself, which still hasn't been fully resolved because it's a government thing, right? Like, it's in, for all the growth and goodness that we've had, we're still in a really precarious position for women's football, especially in Spain, and I'm really not sure, removing Real Madrid out of it, right, if that is indeed what happens, is doing anything to help the women's game. Maybe it helps Real Madrid Femenino, and again, right, like, no one's doubting that all of this helps the clubs involved, but to say that it would help the women's game as a whole, no. And I'm not saying, like, oh, it's such an amazing situation in domestic leagues. No, frankly, the people in charge are quite bad, but the answer, right, is not to just, oh, let's abandon everyone else, right, and just leave it as is. And then I guess the last thing I'll say about it is I'd be really interested to know, like, whether the women's teams in this women's Super League are the same teams as the men's teams, right? Because it would be really strange for a side like Liverpool, who are in the championship, I think, to face a side like Barcelona. So this whole thing just reeks to me as, like, women's football is an afterthought, right? None of this barely any information has been released on it at all, right? It was just kind of, let's throw it in there because, we have to. I just wanted to address that. I think it's important because I think it's going to be extremely under-discussed, and I don't know how much progress and knowledge we'll get from that, because I frankly think everyone involved, right, whether that's UEFA, the clubs themselves, I don't think they really care.
I agree with everything you said, and I agree that they don't care about football. It's the statements from Florentino, the statements from Agnelli, the statements from Joel Glazer are all just a fluff nonsense. All about, like, oh, we represent billions of fans around the world. We've come together at this critical moment, giving the sport we love a foundation, bringing together the best clubs, ensuring world-class competition, great facilities, blah, 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 etc. All nonsense. Just, we all know what this really is, and it's money. That's all it is. I would like to hit you with a couple things. I know we had said 10 minutes, and I guess I knew subconsciously that was going to be impossible. And I know you got to go to record Las Blancas, but just hit you with a couple things I'm curious to get your opinion on.
All right.
I think, like you mentioned earlier in the podcast that, the Knicks, like, would have a path to improvement, right? And you can kind of see that now. They've had a pretty good year for their standards. Is there a path for a bad team in the Super League to have that kind of same success. I suppose if there is a way to do it, like a Tottenham, their path would be something like if they're getting a lot of money from this Super League, they invest that back into just buying players and picking them off of the other teams who are maybe not in this competition, maybe they are in this competition. I'm not sure. That's the path, but it's not that. I don't know if that's a selling point. It's probably not, because that's actually it's not that indifferent to what they're doing now. So it's not like they get draft picks or anything like that. I also do wonder was something like Chris was concerned about Castilla, and he wrote an article about this like while we were recording, and he just mentioned that he worries what would happen to Castilla in a kind of does Castilla have a grim future in a landscape like this, where you just have so much money, maybe you don't have that much of a need for youth talent anymore. That's an interesting perspective too that I haven't thought much about. But what I wanted, did you have any thoughts on that before I ask you my other question?
Not too much. I don't know that much about Castilla, obviously, though I think that youth angle is another thing that will be under discussed, right? Like, how exactly does that structure work? Because if you're banning the clubs entirely, what does that mean? Are you banning the men's and women's team? Are you banning the youth teams? Do we have to create a youth European Super League? Like, what exactly happens? In terms of women's, like, the youth development and stuff like that, I think it's really important to note that clubs like Real Madrid have really important roles, right, in terms of their academies, which spreads players to a lot of other teams, right? But that's the case, but the majority of talent still develops outside these clubs, right? Especially in the women's game right now, where Real Madrid Femenino's academy is not yet developed to that point. Like, the survival of the league is really important to the development and the chances and opportunities given to women's players who may never make it to Real Madrid but are still good enough to play at a high level. What happens when you remove like the teams that can bring the biggest eyes to those leagues? Like, they probably just die, right? Like, I don't know. Like, that's kind of all I have to say about it at the moment. Like, youth football and stuff is not my expertise, but I think that's an angle to consider both for Castilla, but also I think talking about women's football in general, like, what happens to development of talent with women's football if, like, literally it's just all concentrated in this European Super League, if that is what is to come?
Well, I've thought about that a lot, not specifically in the context that you're bringing up, but like I had often thought about, like, everyone always criticizes the idea like how Bayern just buys every single player in the Bundesliga that's good, And once you hit Dortmund, if you're good, you just go to Bayern. Is basically how it works. Like, if you go down the list of players who have done that, it's a crazy list. I also thought about the other perspective, though, that how much money Bayern is feeding these German clubs. Like, how much money do you think is going to be? Doesn't it just get pumped down ultimately? Like, it's a cycle where, like, the big teams will just get the money, they'll pump it down to the lower clubs and buy talent off of them. Like, sometimes I feel like we forget that side of it too.
Yeah, I think that's a side of it to consider, though I will add that, like, the revenue distribution could still probably be a lot better, though. In the Bundesliga, I think it's better than most leagues.
This is what I wanted to pick your brain about. So, like, right now, the leverage from the opposing factors, the opposition kind of faces here, whether it's UEFA, whether it's FIFA, the Premier League, La Liga. Gary Neville's proposal was today, like, just dock points from all of them. Like, all the Premier League teams were involved in this dock points, which is a solution for sure if you want to punish them. Their leverage of all these entities will be that UEFA will say, okay, well, you can no longer participate in the European Championship if you're a player of, like, I'm talking about the international ones. FIFA can say you will no longer be able to participate in a FIFA World Cup if you are part of this Super League nonsense. And I think that's, like, real leverage to have. Like, players, like, by the way, the players are silent about this up until now. Well, for a few reasons. One, it's because it was announced in a way where, like, no one, like, this is all past midnight Spanish time we're talking about. This is
It was a very tactical announcement, let's say.
100%. That, and I'm sure the players under contract can't really speak out against stuff like this. Would be my guess.
Cruz has in like 2020, but it was against UEFA.
That was more of the schedule, I think. Like he was annoyed by the schedule or something like that.
I'll have to relook at the article. I feel like he said something about the Super League, but
maybe he did. You're right. Yeah, maybe he did. Okay, so maybe you're right. So in that case, then I'm wrong about that contract thing. I'm not sure. It was just a hunch. But if so, my point was players. Players. It's not just about money for them because a lot of these players take immense pride playing in the World Cup for their country, representing their countries. Right? We know that. The idea that, like, for them, the idea of not representing their country at a World Cup would be devastating. I think the rebuttal, the devil's advocate, or basically the rebuttal from the clubs will be, all right, take the players out of the World Cup, see what happens to your World Cup. See what happens to your World Cup when there's not a single superstar playing in it. Go ahead, see what happens, be our guest. They'll say the same thing to UEFA, and I think that's ultimately where UEFA and FIFA will have to cave and be like, well, we don't want our international tournaments to suffer. So I guess, trust me, they've thought as much as you, whatever you want to say about them, there's no way Florentino and co have not thought about every single one of these scenarios. And they 100% knew what the backlash was going to be. They knew exactly the arguments against it that were going to be made. They knew the lawsuits that were going to be coming. They prepared for all of this. There's no question to me. So I just think, like, whatever we think is just going to happen. And my prediction, whether I like the idea or not, I think it's going to succeed. And then eventually people will jump in. And I don't know if you had a chance, but Jonathan Liu, a writer I really like, wrote an article for Guardian like about an hour or two ago. And something he said in that, and I'm going to paraphrase it now because I don't have the tab open, but he said a lot of people don't want this to happen, but unfortunately, a lot of people do want this to happen. You know, there are people who have been fans for years, decades, who understand the football culture and, like, they don't want this to happen. But there are a lot of fans who are just kind of new to this. They were casual before, or they're casual now. They're the type of players who will follow wherever their favorite player goes. They're going to be in on board on this, and I don't know if the boycott is going to be enough to stifle something like this. That's my prediction.
Yeah, I don't think fans really know how to organize against clubs, right? Like, again, this is something that would have needed to happen before. Like, it's quite a thing to say, like, boycott. It would really need to be some proper kind of decisive action, almost like you were taking political / activist action in terms of, like, the organization you'd have to do. And we all know how hard that is. Like, if it moves beyond social media in any form, I'd be impressed. I don't think, like, social media criticism is going to be enough, right? Because I think tribalism will take over, or the fact that, like, for example, you and I have, like, livelihoods tied to this, right? Like, I mean, are we just going to quit, right? Like, there's so much, again, because it's money, right, tying us to the ESL, right? I don't think as consumers there's that much we can do unless, like, we get our act together on an unprecedented scale. In terms of UEFA and FIFA's leverage, the World Cup is the only thing I see as being actual leverage, right? Like, I deduct points, who cares, right? At this point, it's about the long term, right? Like, Real Madrid Femenino has been working so hard to qualify for the UEFA Champions League, and now if they're part of a Women's European Super League, that was all for naught. So it's like it's all, like, long term view, right? You deduct points. Literally, okay, we'll take the L this season because this is what we want anyway. FIFA, because of what you said in terms of players having pride for international competitions, that would be really interesting. But then again, I think it becomes a game of calling someone's bluff, right? And once the clubs say, okay, do that, it would take the players being outraged in a way I don't know if they'd be legally allowed to, or again, on an unprecedented level of player solidarity that I haven't really seen in any sport. I mean, probably has been other sports, but other sports I've watched, the NBA is the only league I see where the players have that kind of power. So, yeah, unfortunately, I see this being inevitable, right? It's kind of, as I was saying before, it's one of those things where we needed to stop this way beforehand to get it to this point. And yeah, the only way the only way I see it not happening is if UEFA makes concessions that are so grand that they basically create another European Super League. And I mean, I don't know if that's going to happen because probably UEFA Champions League format they provided was good enough.
I mean, what I think essentially will happen is there will be two separate leagues going on, and you kind of get into the situation where it's like an NBA ABA situation where players are dispersed. One league will be stronger than the other, and there might be like ultimately there might be a merger of some sorts. But this actually there probably won't be because the entities are so. I mean, one will be so clearly above the other that I just don't know how they would even absorb some like another league. Like I don't know. It's messy. It's ugly. I always kind of dreamed that if something like this were to happen, it would be much more orchestrated, organized, and unified and inclusive. But the way it's happening now is pretty ugly. I mean, I do think it's worth pointing out that is Grant basically just telling you to like let's record? Is he asking you yet? By the way,
yeah, he literally messaged me right now. Yeah.
Oh, okay, so like other leagues will continue to exist if like the original, because the original proposal for the European Super League was not for them to leave their domestic leagues, right? It was for them to just have something different than the Champions League, and to have the leagues continue. So Real Madrid would still play against Eibar. They would still play against those La Liga teams. It's just that the Champions League format will be different. So I think that's part of it that the fans are missing a little bit. Like a lot of fans are complaining, like I wanted, a lot of Premier League fans are saying, like, I want my team to play against Stoke on a Wednesday night, whatever, as a half joke. You're still going to have that if the league continues, because the idea was never to leave your domestic league. But obviously the leagues are saying, look, if you're part of the Super League, we will not participate in we're not going to have you in our league. But I think they'll cave. They're going to cave on that, I think. So, okay, last question. Last question, Om. Real Madrid have a massive history with the Champions League. How do you feel about them not being in the Champions League anymore? Like, what will this... Well, so before it was called the European Cup, then it was turned into the Champions League. Will it now be called the European Super League? Like, how do you feel about that aspect of it particularly? Aren't you surprised a little bit that Real Madrid are moving away from the competition that is so synonymous with them?
So there is a little bit of just pure like nostalgia sadness, right? Like that I'm not going to hear the anthem again, that there's literally no club in the history of football that's been more synonymous with. It's literally in a different edition originally, but it's what made the history of Real Madrid. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just that, and the fact that, like, considering how much I've invested emotionally in this women's team, that like all of this about making the top three, right? Then they're not going to be in the Women's Champions League. Like, I don't know. I feel a bit sad, right? Like, ultimately, I don't know if, because the Champions League wasn't perfect in its own form, right? It's just an emotion I have. Like, I don't know if it's a logical one, but I can't really control it. And that for sure, like, I mean, the greatest moments in my fandom come from the Champions League, right? Like, nothing, I don't think anything ever, I'll put money on it right now, will ever top 92-48. Like, I just can't see it happening, right? So there's definitely emotional connection there. In terms of Real Madrid moving away from it, I'm not surprised because Perez has always been someone who's without that much, nostalgia for the past, moving Real Madrid forward, right? Like, I think he wants to be remembered in Real Madrid history as the great modernizer, and he'll do whatever it takes. And for him, this is a very logical step to put Real Madrid forward. I do think this actually puts our future legacy as the greatest club of all time at risk, because the European Super League will be of greater prestige in terms of the competition we're facing. Yeah, Arsenal, Tottenham suck, but with the money they get, they can easily get back on footing, and we will consistently be playing against other teams that don't suck, right? And we'll constantly be being measured up to them. And there's really a lot less of a guarantee that we can get like favorable draws and such. Like 30 years from now, we could only have won like the fifth most European Super Leagues, right? So in terms of the legacy of Real Madrid, could certainly be hurt by this. But in terms of like the money, which is what it's all about, this makes perfect sense from Florentino Perez's perspective, and that's exactly why he did it, because ultimately the finances are what has driven 99% of the decisions he's made, and that's essentially what he's famous for as Real Madrid's president.
Well, let's see what happens when we wake up tomorrow. This thing is going to change, and those of us in North America will probably be having some kind of FOMO when we wake up tomorrow, like trying to figure out what we missed, because they'll be so ahead of us by tomorrow, and what UEFA's response is going to be and all that stuff. Anyways, this was supposed to be a 10-minute conversation, which turned 35 minutes. So, thanks and sorry, I guess, for putting you through that. I guess it was much better than me doing a solo cast about it. So thanks, and maybe give us a preview. When will Las Blancas be up? Tonight, probably. And what should we be expecting?
Yeah, I'm gonna record right after this. I assume it'll be part 2 of the podcast. It wasn't a great game, just like the men's game, to be honest. So we'll try to keep it brief with Grant and I assume there will be more ESL conversation if Grant has any thoughts, because there is that whole emotion about Real Madrid Femenino's like entire journey this season feeling kind of pointless. So that, and then how like bad the game was, basically, which is, I assume, what the men's podcast is going to be about.
All right, well, stay tuned for that, guys, and stick around for part 2 of this podcast. You and Maktira and I are about to break down the Getafe game. Thanks, Om. Take care. Have a good night, and we'll speak soon.
See ya.
Welcome to part 2 of the Managing Madrid podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed Las Blancas. We are here to attempt to talk about Loan Tracker and football. Who knows how much we'll actually get to. I'm sure we'll basically hit all the main talking points. I'm also excited to hear Matt's take about the whole European Super League. I have some added takes from last night's reaction with Om. Not necessarily, I haven't changed my mind on anything per se. I think I just have added and fresh takes, and I probably will continue to have added fresh takes as these days pass and we have new information that comes along. So joining me is Matt Wiltsey. Matt, how are you feeling about this whole Super League thing? Are you riding the wave? Are you going against the wave? Where are you on this?
Yeah, so I've had I've had a day to process, and I guess I'm kind of in the viewpoint where I feel like this change is inevitable. Like, it's always going to happen. Something was going to change within football. This has been coming for how many years? The UEFA Champions League was going to change regardless, right? So from that viewpoint, I'm like, okay, I'm kind of riding this wave, seeing how this plays out. Like, we all know this is just to distribute the money to the rich clubs and help improve their profits even further. But at the same point, I mean, I think there's been a lot of good counter arguments made about what UEFA and FIFA have done and how they've exploited the system. And so who's to say you don't want, yes, it's the rich clubs getting richer, but who's to say you'd rather have the money in Florentino Perez's hand than Sepp Blatter, for example. So there's multiple different viewpoints to this. I find the reasoning behind it very interesting, and I like the push for it. And I think that it's kind of like, yes, we're hearing all this uproar, especially on social media, and a lot of fans coming out and putting out banners and signs. And I just feel like part of it is like these clubs are institutions. They're like huge corporations. And so, like any huge corporation, they have social scientists, they have marketing professionals, they have people, just research analysts, all these people that look into what fans want and what the clubs and what will make them money and what like predictive analytics and everything like that. And so from my viewpoint, it's kind of like how corporations know, oh, people say they want to buy healthy food and they want to see healthy food in stores, but then when they actually go up to the counter, they still end up getting the sweets. And I kind of feel like that's the European Super League.
That's interesting. So this is, you bring up a lot of points. What you're also talking about here goes into really, really deep discourse. I think that is very niche and is like kind of, it's not a popular mainstream idea, what you're saying. You're basically talking about like human psychology and what we respond to. And, you know, so much of marketing is geared towards our subconscious and giving us things that we think we don't want, but we subconsciously want. Whether it's like, you know, you can argue why McDonald's is so successful, even though it gives us no nutritional value. It just pumped down our throats, or even just like you kind of, now we can even dive deeper into the whole nutrition dialogue. So much of the things we buy and eat is basically based on marketing, not necessarily science, right? And this one, look, I think it's kind of similar to the analogy of clickbait. Clickbait, a lot of people hate it. The reality is if we don't put like a nice title on a really, really great piece of content, no one's going to click on it. People ask for tactical analysis, and then we write like, you know, 4,000 words of tactical analysis, and that doesn't get nearly as much traffic as an Mbappe Haaland rumor story that is the same story every single day. With this one, I think what ultimately will happen is that, I mentioned this on the podcast last night with Om. I think it's going to succeed whether we like it or not. And but today when I woke up for the first time since it was announced, I felt that if there is possible like that this idea, it's possible that this idea could break down for a number of reasons. Once, like, it's very similar to like if you watch the Avengers at the end and Thanos thinks he's won, and then all of a sudden these bubbles pop up in the sky and every single character in the Marvel universe just appears. That's basically what they're up against. They have sheer power and leverage. Like, if FIFA comes out and says, you're not playing in the World Cup, the clubs will say, cool. I mean, look, this is more of a long-term thing. To be quite honest, I think everyone's kind of happy not to play in Qatar right now. Like, this is actually a good excuse, but more of a long-term implication thing of, you know, the World Cup is an important tournament historically, and no one will deny that. But I think they'll also say, it's kind of cool that we don't have to send our players on international duty every single week, and we can just focus on our squad health. But today was the first time I did feel like enough people are opposing this idea that it can actually potentially break down. I think the ultimate deciding factor, Matt, will be not so much fans protesting outside the stadiums. It will be what actual figures come out against this, right? So far, all the players that have come out against this, I think maybe the largest figure possibly was Ander Herrera among active players. I could be wrong on that. I don't have maybe the latest up-to-date info on this. Mesut Ozil spoke about it, but he's not really an active, relevant player right now. And I think if, like, apparently Klopp has a press conference tonight, if somebody like him comes out against this, that's a game changer. Like that, somebody like him coming out and saying something against this will be more detrimental to the idea of the Super League than like hundreds of thousands of fans and their voice would be. In the NBA, it's a similar parallel, is that whatever LeBron James says publicly, that's what the NBA basically has to do because he has so much power as a figure. Michael Jordan had that too. Like, everyone looks at these people. If people like Klopp, Zidane, like Tuchel already has spoken saying that like he leaves that to the club, which basically means I can't say anything. That's basically what it means. But if Klopp and Pep and Zidane and Messi and Ronaldo, these guys don't say anything, I think it's a done deal, to be quite honest. And I just think I don't think people know why they're upset. Not everyone, but I think a lot of people don't really know why they're upset. The reason I say that is
people
because
don't like change.
Well, that's definitely one side of it. I also don't think that when people say this is about greed, I'm not sure where you've been the past 80 years. Football has always been about this. You can go back to the 50s, how Real Madrid wanted to sign Di Stefano and Puskás, how Barcelona used their political power to sign Kubala over Real Madrid. You can talk about the money that was involved back then. You can talk about Alfredo Di Stefano being ruthless in contract negotiations. It's never been just about the love of football. That's part of it for sure. I will never deny that existence of it, but it's a business. Unfortunately, Real Madrid and Barcelona, and if you want to go lower down the ladder, whether it's Leganés and Leipzig who don't want to be part of this, etc. Bayern, Dortmund. Real Madrid is not really different. These clubs are not different from Amazon or Walmart or any of these companies. Everyone just wants to make more money. And so people are mad at the 12 Super Leagues who wanted to make the 12 Super League teams who wanted to make money, but that energy really didn't exist before this when we're talking about UEFA wanting to make money, FIFA making money, PSG, the only reason they're not in this is because of their TV rights and money deals and their deals with Qatar and all that stuff. So I don't really believe in the virtue signaling and the fake altruism. I mentioned that on Twitter. I'm not necessarily saying I'm behind the Super League. I just find it ironic that the people who are mentioning it's about greed, it's always been about greed, unfortunately. And greed just means like you're a business and you want to make more money. So I'll stop rambling there. I'll let you kind of chime in.
Well, yeah, you said a lot there, and so one thing I want to pick up off of was the player power and just influential figures. You mentioned that if certain people come out and are against this, then that could sway. But even then, Kian, I feel like you mentioned it on Twitter, like Florentino is 2 steps ahead, just like he was in the Figo deal. Like he really does have all the leverage. It's incredible. And with all the star power that these teams have, like UEFA, FIFA, they don't have anything. The reason why they're freaking out is because they're going to lose millions upon millions of dollars. The value of their broadcast deals, everything, it just infinitely goes down. Lawsuits out the wazoo. So this is why it's just creating this total uproar. But I really think, like, I find it interesting that Florentino and the clubs have decided now to release this statement. I guess they're trying to solicit TV buyers or broadcast money, whether it be through Amazon, Facebook, whoever. That's the only reason why I could think they would release it now rather than the end of the season, because this really throws everything up in the air, and we're even seeing, like, who knows what happens with the Champions League. I mean, I think there's a lot of contract loopholes to get out of there before they could disqualify us or any of the teams involved. But there's just a lot still kind of hanging in the balance, and I think that's what we're waiting to see. But what was the other thing I wanted to say? Yeah, I just feel like the actual premise, like if we're just focusing on the European Super League itself, the actual premise in the competition, like if I'm speaking honestly, I do think I would enjoy it and I would watch the games. I can't lie about that. And I do think if the Champions League was going to change, which it was, and they were going to add 36 teams and they were going to do this more type of league standing thing, almost exactly like what the Super League is doing, then I would prefer the Super League method just because it's less teams and it's higher quality teams. But at the same time, I don't discredit the fact that, like, look at what Shakhtar Donetsk did versus us this season. Like, there's got to be, if the European Super League can find a way to be a little bit more of a meritocracy and like really bring some of these teams, like we still haven't really heard how these 5 open slots, how those teams qualify. But like if they can bring that to the fore and make it a little bit more of, I know a lot of us are looking for like the promotion relegation. Obviously these 15 teams that are starting out are going to be pretty much solidified no matter what, which I think is, that whole premise is ridiculous to everyone. And that I agree with. But the actual general concept of the European Super League and like what they're trying to achieve versus what the Champions League format was going to be, I probably prefer that.
I would too, but I just want to revisit the Figo thing. So what Florentino has done here really reminded me of the Figo thing, because he did the unthinkable by basically thinking of every single possible scenario and putting the ball in his court in every single one. And by the end of it, no matter how many different entities were involved, he still came out on top because he kind of planted the right seeds. So he told Figo, if I win the elections, you will sign for Real Madrid, and if I don't win elections, and you will agree to this, and if I don't win elections, like, because you're thinking, why would Figo ever agree to that? Because he never wanted to go to Real Madrid. And then Florentino said, if I don't win elections, then I will pay you a sum of money. And Figo was like, well, that's easy deal because you're not going to get elected, because he was a nobody at that point, apart from some like being relatively known in some construction circles and stuff. So that's how he got Figo to sign that contract. Then he went over to the socios and said, I will sign Luis Figo, vote for me. And well, how do you get them to believe you? Well, you say, if I don't sign Figo and I get elected, then I will pay all the socio fees for you. So all of a sudden he gets elected because the socios were wanted the promise of Figo, and it's a win-win, because if he doesn't sign Figo, then they get free socio fees. And all of a sudden Figo was tied because he had signed that weird deal. And this reminded me of that, because I think he's expected all of the backlash. I think everyone in that Super League, at that Super League table, has expected that this was going to happen. I don't think they were like, okay, let's do this, announce it, and great, we'll be on our way. I'm pretty sure they've planned for everything, whether it's lawsuits, whether it's FIFA and UEFA banning against them, to ban transfers and all this. I'm 100% sure they knew Bayern and Dortmund weren't going to join. And because I'm sure they would have had that discussion beforehand with them, like they're not just going to go in this blindly. But my question will be, like the 5 teams, I also would be curious to know how that would work. Like, what's the criteria for those 5 teams getting in? I'm also curious to actually see who fills out the 20 teams. So far, Porto seem like they haven't been in. Leipzig, Bayern, Dortmund out. PSG out, not because of altruistic reasons. Benfica out. So I wonder where that kind of leaves. How are they going to fill that out? Will it be a case where that league will get so successful that everyone will kind of just change their stance on it? But I agree with you. I think, look, so this is just, I think people sometimes just maybe will misinterpret all this stuff for opinion. I'm just kind of laying everything out there. But I think I would have enjoyed this much more. Like, I would have enjoyed these teams strangling UEFA and FIFA and all these and all these entities. I would have enjoyed it more if the tournament was slightly more fair. I understand why they would, I guess, not make it this way, but I would have liked it if they actually made themselves relegatable from this league, where it's like, all of us founding members, we can drop in and out of it, and that holds us accountable. That would be much more interesting to me, much more appealing to me. I think 15 founding members, is it 15 plus? Or is it going to be 20 ultimately? I can't remember that part.
Yeah, I think it's 20. We have 12 right now. They're waiting on, there's supposed to be 3 others, which we all assume is PSG, Dortmund, and Bayern, that were supposed to be part of the 15, and then 5 other slots available.
Yeah. So it would have been more fun if they could have dropped from that based on how you're performing, because Manchester City, they're really only in this discussion the last few years. Same with Liverpool to an extent, although Liverpool, from a historical perspective, they should be in there. Arsenal and Tottenham, are not there based on what they are now. They're based on, money really, but also kind of some of their past achievements. I suppose Tottenham really is an outlier on this. They don't have anything to the table, but apart from money. So it would be much more interesting if you could be relegated from this, and it would be more inclusive. I will say that.
Yeah, and you talk about kind of the stronghold that Florentino and the crew have over UEFA and FIFA and these different entities. Like, let's say the dust settles and they do come to some sort of agreement, which I'm personally, I think it's almost too far gone now. I feel like the line has been crossed. But let's say we get to a hypothetical where they do come to agreement, and they reformat basically what looks exactly like the Super League for these clubs, but it's still under UEFA. I would like to see those clubs use their influence then and kind of cut out a lot of these needless games, the UEFA Nations League, the World Cup in Qatar in the middle of winter, have an impact there at least. Let's reduce the number of games. We're constantly talking about reducing the number of games. If you want to put higher quality games, great. For a higher price, great. Like, we'll take that. Just reduce the number of quality games, and your product likely will be better.
I think we could also just talk about some of these, like, I kind of trust you. I think you could come up with a very quick rebuttal to all of these opposition kind of demands, right? So let me kind of test you with it and see if you can give me a quick answer. What is the Super League's response to you can't play in our leagues anymore?
I'm fine with that, because at the end of the day, you're gonna need these teams and these star powers to negotiate any TV deal you want. Otherwise, your TV deal is gonna be in the ruins. You're not gonna make any of the money you budgeted for the next however many years, and you're not gonna have the star power. So fine, leave us out, but you'll be crawling back soon enough.
Correct. What is the response to UEFA and FIFA to that we can't play in the international tournaments?
I think the clubs love that, because then their players don't, their assets, their players don't get potentially injured, don't get tired, don't get fatigued. Maybe the only thing they don't like is that they don't get just the marketing and publicity from those tournaments. But other than that, I'm sure they love it. But it's the players themselves that they have to worry about. Are players willing to accept that? Are they willing to miss out on those tournaments? And I don't think they are, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing to the response to the first question is you can't afford to lose these guys. You can't afford to lose Sergio Ramos, you name it, all these big stars that are going to be out there, part of the World Cups and the Euros. Like, you need those guys out there for those TV deals and for those contracts and everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the biggest sticking point is, like, you guys go ahead without us and see what your Euro and World Cup looks like this year. Let's enjoy your TV ratings. Enjoy all the money that you took from Qatar to make this World Cup happen, and going to do it in the dead of summer. And I guess it's winter time. So I guess that analogy won't work here, but we'll see you guys kind of go through that without all these superstars and see what happens to your World Cup and international tournaments, and then we'll wait for your phone call for the next one to bring everybody back. And there was, like, I think the biggest point here again returns to I think the people who have the most power, quote unquote, with their words are the players themselves.
Yeah.
Ohm brought up, because I mentioned that I don't think the players and coaches will say anything for contractual purposes. Ohm brought up the fact that Cruz actually spoke about the European Super League earlier this season, and he spoke up against it. And I didn't have the exact quote at that time. Let me see if I can bring it up really quickly now, because I think it would be worth it. So Cruz's quote was, this is back in, I believe it was November or in the fall. Anyways, he says, "Unfortunately, we players don't decide these things. We're just puppets of FIFA and UEFA. If there were a players' union, we wouldn't play the Nations League or a Spanish Super Cup in Saudi Arabia. These competitions are intended to absorb everything financially and squeeze players physically too. Everything doesn't always have to be more, faster, more money." So I agree with Cruz. I always have said there's too much football. I also strongly believe that if this Super League goes ahead, the next step is that, I mean, even now, really, but there should be a players' union. There absolutely should be. The players should have more of a voice than they have right now. So I do think that's, to be honest, that's where all the argument that breaks down. Because I side with the players more often than not in anything, because they're the ones who bring this product so much joy and make us glued to our, we get glued to our seats and we watch these games. I would totally side with the players if they came out and said, like, no, and this is too much and whatever. I generally tend to side with that kind of stuff, the players and the ones who are bringing the money in, while I do also understand the business side. But I think the healthiest way to do it is if you have a players' union that had a voice in these situations. So
Yeah, I mean, as you were reading that quote, that's exactly what I was thinking to myself is if the players came together and they all it had to be united, and that's probably the hardest thing is to get all these guys as a group to agree to this, and you need the big name players in there. And if you have them all, then yes, that could be the one thing that stops this. Otherwise, I don't see how it stops. But at the same point, like, are those players, they have to play devil's advocate. Like, are those players really going to be happier with the UEFA Champions League setup, the new setup, which is basically going to be the European Super League, but with more games? So I think they have to look at both sides of it.
Well, that's the interesting part. Kroos didn't actually come out and say he was fully against the Super League. He just wants kind of like more control for the players, and he speaks against the UEFA Nations League in a way, and like all these like the Super Cup games in Saudi Arabia, which again, really, it's only the purpose of money. The idea is terrible to go across the world mid-season, and put a wrench in your title aspirations. So I think they'd be happy if the solution was like, okay, we scrap all of these extra superfluous trophies. We can compensate losing that revenue by just having more revenue in the Super League. You guys are all happy. We're all happy. Less football, more money. It seems like a win-win for everybody in that sense. Now, I think the teams who will be, I mean, it's kind of interesting to see who the teams who are upset about this. Some of these teams, not all, but some of them will never probably sniff Champions League football. I don't know how much would actually change for them, other than the fact that it actually would, if you were to kick out all the teams from these leagues, which won't happen, I don't think. Again, I think the leagues will cave. They would actually have a stronger position in the league to qualify for these championships, by the way, which would have less prize money because just the TV money would shift to the Super League, but it would allow them to kind of qualify for Europe in better situations. So what's the argument? One of the arguments I've seen proposed is, well, you just ban transfers. Like, none of these clubs can sign any player from any other team from now on, which is a big one. I don't think it's sustainable that you could implement something like that. And I think the arguments against it are, well, all those teams would lose the revenue that they're getting from these big teams, and that feeds down. It's like a funnel, that money feeds down, right? The other side of the coin is the big clubs can just pump that money back into investing into youth team players, sign the best young players from around the world, whether it's Brazil or Asia or whatever. You can focus your money there if you want to. I just think there's workaround there for that the big clubs can exercise. And also, I think, again, they just have too much power and leverage to say, well, go ahead, but you're going to lose our revenue buying those players from you.
Well, a lot of this reminds me of kind of Alfredo Di Stefano's journey and how he played in that. They called it like a pirate league, that Colombian league, and that's where the whole transfer debacle came from with Real Madrid and Barcelona. Was they weren't sure which team actually owned him, because technically he was on loan from River Plate to, I forget the Colombian team he was a part of, and so Real Madrid and Barcelona were negotiating with different clubs because they weren't sure which team he was actually a part of. And so that's what led to that whole transfer debacle. And I could see tons of like legal issues like that coming into play, and like teams maybe loaning a player out to or finding workarounds in the transfer system to make this work. And I mean, if you remember, Alfredo Di Stefano, he wasn't able to play for Argentina once he joined the team and joined that Colombian Super League as it was. He no longer played for Argentina. And so there are obviously players will be willing to make that sacrifice if it ever came to that.
Yeah, it's, I think ultimately one of the things that, by the way, Eduardo just sent me a message saying that Florentino is going to be on Chiringuito tonight. So that'll be fun.
Wow. Has he ever been on Chiringuito before?
I don't remember.
I feel like I can't remember him ever being on Chiringuito. Like, that's...
I don't watch Chiringuito, but I guess they'll lure me in on that one. Count me into the clickbait sheep in that one.
Yeah.
So, what was I going to say? Oh, I guess, yeah. One of the things we have to remember, and again, right or wrong, is that because this is a business, these clubs have the right to do whatever the hell they want. They have no moral obligation. They are not governed by any kind of governing body by law. They have rules from UEFA and FIFA, and they haven't agreed with them, so they're basically forming their own governing body. And that's kind of what capitalism brings to the society, unfortunately. Like, I don't know what else to say. Like, I'm not an anti-capitalist. Everything we consume and enjoy, it would be hypocritical to be anti-capitalist. I think, and I do think one of the most under-discussed subjects, which I've only seen a couple people discuss, one of them being you on Twitter, Jonathan Liu also hinted at it in his Guardian article last night. As much as we see the uproar here, the amount of fans in the millions, I think it's going to be, that will just love tuning in to watching superstars play for the next couple decades and beyond. I think it's going to be a moot point. Like, I think this outrage may just turn into something that becomes forgotten if this goes ahead, because again, I just don't see it not succeeding from a product level on the field, all that stuff. And for those who are kind of worried about I want to see Shakhtar play in the Europa and stuff like that, you're still going to get, upsets in the Super League. These 5 teams who come in and out, Real Madrid and Liverpool and Tottenham and all these guys are not going to win all these games. There's going to be a lot of these teams, I think, could even take batterings in the Super League, and it's not going to be a predictable league. I don't think. It's going to be a lot of variables that are thrown into this. It's going to be entertaining and it's going to be unpredictable. Again,
yeah,
the discussion is not about right or wrong. It's just about once you put this product out there and all these fans, and we saw how much you can see it in the numbers online. When Cristiano Ronaldo left Real Madrid, the numbers almost exactly to a T matched up. The amount of readers that Manager Madrid lost and the amount of readers that the SB Nation Juventus blog gained were identical. And same thing with the club social media accounts. Real Madrid's official social media accounts lost, and the ones that were gained by Juventus. This is an era where fans just follow players. It's hugely pertinent in the NBA, where basically wherever LeBron James goes, his fans follow him. Oh, Marvin is one of them. Wherever LeBron goes, he follows him. A lot of players will follow Mbappe where they go. A lot of Brazilians will follow Neymar where he goes. I don't resonate with that. I'm just saying I really don't resonate with that. I'm a Real Madrid fan. No player leaving or coming in and out will change that for me. But this is just kind of the era we live in, and that's, I think, going to be more and more prevalent as we move forward, and that's a recognition by the Super League guys to kind of recognize that the game is evolving, the game is changing.
Yeah, and again, I can't help but point to the fact that Florentino and Jose Angel Sanchez and that whole group, they're always 2-3 steps ahead in terms of innovation and just forward thinking and business thinking and capitalist ideas, call it what it is. And I tweeted it out this morning that they're not thinking about our generation. They're not thinking about the current generation of fans. They're thinking about the next generation of fans. And there's been tons of research out. You can look in the Wall Street Journal. I put out an NPR article. There's tons of research out about how Generation Z and younger fans are consuming the game and what they look for. And they're watching highlights. They're interacting through social media. They want to watch the big stars. They want to trash talk on social media. They want to do all of that. And like you said, Keon, oftentimes now they follow the player rather than the club. And so in order to engage with these fans and create a product that's more suitable for this upcoming generation, I think this is what society has brought. At the end of the day, we can say there can be all this uproar, but society has built this system, and we're raising our young people now to prefer this new system. And I think that's just the God's honest truth. Like it's maybe hard to swallow, but that's just the reality. And one part I want to read out from a Wall Street Journal article was about the teams focusing on Generation Z and the challenge that they have and the sense of urgency that they have to like really bring these fans in and wrap them in and try to get hold of them. And so it said, quote, failing to hook young people might not devastate today's bottom line, but it threatens to muddle the future of every league, every team, in every sport. Like that's how serious they're taking this. And I think that's why Florentino's been trying to push so for so long on this idea and on this new league. And at the end of the day, I mean, we know it's about money, but this is what our society has kind of pushed us towards. Like everyone always in my mentions screaming about, oh, we got to get Mbappe and Haaland. It doesn't matter that we don't have any money. We have to get them. We have to get them. Like this is the byproduct of that. Like you want all these new younger generations want their super club to always be the best and always sign the best players. And you see it like on social media when they're always the comments underneath, like it'll be an article or a release from a club and it'll just say, we don't care, sign so and so. We don't care, sign so and so. Like this is kind of what we've created, this monster. And I think the European Super League is almost like a byproduct of that. And I just find it really like it's interesting. I find it really interesting that like this is kind of how it's evolving.
Well, I always knew football would change and will continue to change, just like everything will change. I'm generally the type of person who doesn't resist change because I'm just kind of weird like that, where I actually embrace change. I embrace kind of this uncomfortable things. Yeah, you kind of strike me as the type of person who is too. But that's just kind of how I've been, not necessarily raised, but that's just something I've always resonated with. Change, discomfort, kind of leveling up and looking ahead. I really, really enjoy listening to things from Gary Vee because he is always ahead of the curve, and he gets so criticized when he comes out with opinions, and then he always gets proven right with social media and where it's headed. I love stuff like that. If you look back in all of sports, there was so much resistance in the NBA when the 3-point line was introduced, and that this would change. And then there was so much resistance to when the Warriors started shooting threes like crazy and revolutionizing the game. There's always so much resistance to change. I wasn't around when they took away the back pass rule in football. Thank God that happened. I'd be curious to know if anyone was outraged about that. But I always hope that when change is made, and who knows, maybe this is the wrong change. I don't have the answers. But I always hope that when change is made, it would be a little bit more unified. This one is really ugly. It's too ugly for my liking. I don't like the way it's completely broken everything. Like to me, football kind of broke in the last 24 hours. And I don't mean that it was unbroken, because I don't believe the idea that we shouldn't have fixed football if it wasn't broken. Because this is inevitable in a lot of ways, because there was just a lot of issues. Like there are so many different entities and so many conflicting things and schedules and all this stuff. I mean, look at the league itself. There's a federation and a league, and no one really understands who does what. Like this, it's so it's so vague. So it needed fixing, but it's just ugly. And part of the reason is because there is so many entities involved. Like it's confusing. So I think the Super League teams were like, enough is enough. We'll form our own governing body. We make our own rules, and we don't have to answer to anybody except for ourselves, which is understandable. So yeah, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have much more to add. I think we've kind of I think we got a lot out there actually on the Super League.
Can we take a 30-second break before the loan tracker? Because I just spilled water on my laptop. I want to clean that up.
Yeah.
And then I'll call you back. Okay. All right.